actually, for her.
Both
a lot
and.
of the time, so.
Hello, YouTube.
Hello.
Apologies. For some reason, our YouTube only recorded like 19 seconds last week,
Really?
and I have no idea why. So hopefully I'll check in here throughout the podcast and make sure we're on track.
How's our internet? We good?
Looks good.
Yeah.
It was a wild ride.
Were
with the
you better
internet this week.
yesterday with your internet?
Yes, I went through withdrawals, and that was a problem. But I mean, I was mostly freaking out about work because my deadlines for everything are Wednesday, and this was Tuesday, and I was like, oh, I have to get things done.
We were just talking yesterday. I was at Stouffer's. We were talking about it, and then we're talking about it again in Bible study, that we are inevitably slaves of our technology.
That's fact.
Once it comes in, we build our lives around it, and then we're stuck with it. So.
All right, I shall start here.
This is The Real Deal.
Yep. Hello, everybody.
Welcome to The Real Deal.
The Real Deal. We're changing the name of the podcast to The Real Deal
Actually,
with Rich and Stacy.
Actually, looked at that when we started up, but there are other real deals out there.
There are other something reals as well.
Yes.
Several.
There are not very many something to talk about. There weren't
Which
other
is funny
something reels that I could find at the time.
Because isn't every podcast something to talk about?
It seems like it. Some
are not.
Some
really.
are things
Some
that you shouldn't talk about.
Right.
You know.
But we're going to talk. Maybe
Like-
some of our things are things that we
like
shouldn't
some of the
talk about.
commercials, or maybe some of our things are the things that we should talk about more, but we end up talking about things that we shouldn't.
They don't know that I know that you know that we're.
All that stuff.
Yeah, but we're here
Yes.
and we're going to talk about things.
Things.
We are still in the 10 Commandments,
We are indeed, but we're getting close to the end.
and then there are no rules. No, I'm just kidding.
only about 3 more months. Yeah. So we'll get to Commandment 10 this week. Then we'll do a sort of a recap before we press on. And right now, this week we're looking at the idea of bearing false witness and the 9th commandment, which is, as we go through all of the commands, I've been really what do I want to say, struck by how interrelated they all are. Like you can't, it's just kind of the nature of it. You can't really violate one commandment without violating others at the same time, because there's so much overlap. When we're talking about, stealing and false testimony, so much of this goes together, that they overlap each other, and they come out of the covetousness that we'll talk about next week. And all of it is doing our thing instead of God's thing, which goes back to the beginning.
Well, I think that's because at least from what I've picked up off of this whole little mini series we're in, is that they're so much bigger than what you initially think. You hear the statement, "Don't steal." Okay, but it's so much bigger than robbing a bank. And all of them. I mean, we spent 3-4 weeks on infidelity and things like that. So they're all just so much deeper than I guess they often get credit for.
And we really probably could spend at least that much time on each one of these.
Sure.
And far more time on that adultery prohibition, because the more embedded the wrong perspective is in our society, the more we need to work through it, the more we need to talk about it. And I think as we're looking at like covetousness for next week, it's like, wow, this just keeps, the rabbit hole keeps going as you go into it. And I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned it the other day when we were talking or texting.
We don't talk.
We are slaves to our technology. We had no communication because the internet was down. We live in the same town, but that was a conversation Shelly and I had. Is like, we have all this technology and nobody knows their neighbors the way they used to. Back in the old days, when you're going around in a horse and buggy, everybody knew everybody.
Oh, that was the old days.
So anyway, as we're looking at these things, I completely sidetracked myself there and got distracted. But
covetousness.
Well, as we're looking at these things, I didn't think about the impact of growing up in a social media world.
Oh yeah.
On covetousness,
you should look at the mental health stuff associated with that.
Oh, for sure. And there's a lot of research about it. There's a lot, but because that, to me, that's still a newer portion of my life. It's the majority perhaps of my adulthood. but social media came later after internet
Right.
and all
Well,
those kinds of things.
Facebook started when I was in college.
Okay.
And back then you needed a collegiate email address to be
Yeah.
on there. And so I started,
Because
that was
MySpace was already big and
RIP
fading. And so-
MySpace. MySpace was my high school time. But even that, you look, I know we'll talk about this next week. But
MySpace and LimeWire, is that what it's
you download a song all night on LimeWire, and then in the morning
With
you'd
your
realize,
dial-up?
right? In the morning you'd realize it didn't go through, and it was just the most devastating thing. Anyway,
all the artists went broke.
right. Anyway, I know we're going to talk about this a little next week, but even, back in MySpace, it started and you had a top 8 and
Yeah.
you would change your top 8 friends. And if you got home from school and you realized that somebody moved you down a space or whatever, it's like, yeah, it was the end of the world.
devastated.
So yeah, anyway, we can talk more about that later, but yeah, it's definitely had an impact.
Well, and you look at how that relates to the bearing false testimony. So as we're looking
Bring us
at
back.
at this false testimony, false witness, the NIV says you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. I think the ESV and most of the other older or more literal ones, ESV is newer, but would call it bearing false witness against your neighbor. So the core premise here is in the idea is looking toward legal proceedings,
Mhm.
making false accusations, saying things that are untrue to give advantage in a say a negotiated settlement or whatever. And we can spin that forward to today and look at all the lies that get told in custody hearings, things like that. So many things that go on. This is driving me crazy. I have to move this microphone. Okay.
Sorry, everybody.
So that was my slightly OCD moment there, I suppose. So as we're looking at all the different ways that we can present things falsely to be able to gain an advantage or to do it at someone else's expense, these things become pervasive.
Mhm.
So then when we look at the broader concept of it, it's not merely in a legal situation. It certainly is that, but it's any situation in which we misrepresent reality at someone else's expense.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about lying, slander, even presenting something as true and factual and real that has no direct impact, like social media. I'm not personally lying to or about you, although that happens a lot too. But I'm presenting a supposed reality
Mhm.
that isn't real, and that is influencing and manipulating how other people see me, see themselves, and create, which leads to the covetousness
Right.
that we talk about next week. But in all of these different areas, we're misrepresenting reality or truth in order to gain an advantage, to put someone else at a disadvantage, to make ourselves feel better, to present some sort of a picture that is false. And there's no way, and I think this is really important for us to grasp as Christians. We cannot serve the God of all truth with lies. We can't do that.
I think that, another thing that I've kind of discovered along the way here as we've been going through the 10 Commandments is even those who are not Christ followers, they have to find workarounds
Yeah.
to follow these. I'm not saying that correctly, but most people aren't going to go out and kill somebody.
Right.
Most people recognize that stealing is bad, but they're not doing it from the point of, oh, this is biblically commanded. So with this one in particular,
But I don't want people stealing from me. So I
Right.
need a society in which theft is not acceptable
Right.
or normal. I don't want to be lied to.
so
We can't function that
they
way.
find ways to talk themselves into it when really they're talking themselves out of it.
Right.
But with this one in particular, a new thing, I guess it's new, maybe in the past decade or so, you always hear people talking about, well, my reality, my truth, my this, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And I really hate those statements because the fact of the matter is there's one reality and one truth.
Right,
You can
yeah.
have a different observation of things. You can have a different opinion of things. But when you say this is my truth, it
Right.
might not be your truth. That's really the stupidest thing you could possibly say.
It's interesting that you bring that up because that is something that changed over time.
Mhm.
That before the postmodern type thinking became prominent, and now we're postmodernism, which is, there's so much to keep up with. Before that, when you would talk about things like, my truth or my reality, it's saying it's not in, it would not have been perceived as something that is purely subjective. It's that this is reality, and it's the reality that I'm living right now. Your reality as a divorced woman is not separated from reality overall, right? So the reality that I'm living as a married grandfather is not ontologically separated from your reality as a single mom, dealing with these situations.
Reality is reality.
Because reality is reality. And so we didn't have this general accepted understanding where the masses believed that truth can be different for different people.
Right.
That
every single person on the planet is in a different situation.
Right. Exactly. And that's all that it would have meant if you had said that, say, in the 1980s or early 90s.
But it doesn't change the overarching reality of life, Exactly.
Yeah. That's so. If I going back to the divorce thing, the realities. Yes.
You know how I love it.
But when we're talking about marriage, sexuality, and family, God gave it for a reason. He gave it a particular way. Anything other than what God said is broken. It's not right. And as we know, our society is based on, at this point, doing it every possible way that God did not create. Right. So, which leads us to the whole LGBTQ thing, there's the California, their conflict right now with the Trump administration over, I think it's everybody, but California in particular, with public sex education, all of these kinds of things that are coming together. It is a societal push against reality. And so we want to say subjectively that you can have your truth. We can all do these things as if what God says doesn't matter, but that doesn't change the reality. It can't change the reality.
And it distorts everything. And because if everybody has their individual truth, then you don't know, then you're going to be like, well, what is the reality? I mean, it messes everything up to the point where it just simply does not work.
And we've been observing that, again, in all of these areas of the moral and sexual revolution. We've been observing the chaos.
Right.
And so now we're seeing a little bit of a backlash.
When you step away from it doesn't work.
Right. There's Stand with Riley Gaines and all these different things where people are like, wait, no, I don't accept your so-called truth. You're going to say that this male can be in the locker room with my daughter, that this male can be, because he's decided that he's not, that his so-called truth then means that he can compete in sports events against my daughter.
Right.
I'm not buying it. And so you're seeing this backlash over these things, partly because for the last however many years we've been wrestling with this, I lose track of time. It's just been chaos. And people are like, wait, your pronouns are what? I don't know where the next weirdness comes from. And boy, I just offended a lot of people by saying weirdness. If that's offending you, you probably are a new listener, because it's again, we're talking about truth. When we say that weird things aren't weird, when we say that normal things aren't normal, or when we misrepresent what is contrary to, not just contrary to God's word. Yes, for sure, that's the heartbeat of all of it. But what is contrary to nature, to the created order, what God the way he designed things to work in the first place. When we say that is not true, we are giving a false testimony. And it is harmful to everyone who hears and receives that testimony. So anytime I say, whatever it is, my child lies, right? And I say, hey, it's okay. That's a lie. I lied to my child, because lying is not okay.
And then you just have the snowball effect of all of it.
And so if my teenage daughter decides, you know what, I think I'm a boy, and I affirm that for her, I am lying to her. I'm bearing a false witness to her. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't real issues inside of her, in her heart, in her psyche that I need to deal with.
But for a fact, she's not a boy.
But facts are still facts.
Right.
And so if I try to deal with a situation that is uncomfortable by misrepresenting reality in order to make it more comfortable, that is by definition bearing false testimony. I'm bearing false witness here. And it's dishonest, it's not loving, it's harmful. And so while that's certainly not the only area, I spent an hour and 18 minutes talking about it on Sunday.
And ironically, I don't think you talked about this particular thing much.
No, I don't think that I did, but I know I mentioned it.
Yeah.
And I saw Vodi Bakum talk about, that this is part of, I don't think Rob brings it up in his book. For anybody who didn't hear Sunday, I did mention, if you've been listening for a while, Rob Nash is a repeat guest on our podcast. His latest book is sitting right there, Being Honest in a World of Lies. I wish I had it so I could hold it up to the screen. We did, yeah. And I found it to be very helpful. He wasn't specifically, like he didn't write it for this commandment, but is addressing the things that pertain to it. And as, we're kind of looking through this, just the idea, if we didn't even get into the rest of the details of his book, the idea that dishonesty, that misrepresentation of truth, of reality is so pervasive in our society that we don't even realize when we're lying, because it's so broad, it's so much, we're inundated with it. And it's like the fish not realizing it's wet because it's, in the water all the time.
Well, I think you had a good point in saying, we often lie and maybe don't even realize it in an effort to make ourselves and or others more comfortable.
Yes.
And I was thinking on Sunday of, the little white lie of, does this dress make me look fat? Oh no, you look great.
I can say I've never asked anyone that question.
If that dress has made you look fat, you look great. But things like that. And we don't think that things like that are harmful. And obviously, if you want to get in trouble with your wife, you go for it. But that's just a small example of these bigger lies that I think we tend to tell ourselves and others in an effort to not only make people more comfortable, but nowadays not to potentially harm relationships.
Right.
You can't say the wrong thing or people can cut you out of their lives instantly. And so it's like
we
walking
have a
on
personal
eggshells.
cancel culture.
Right. So you feel like you have to walk on eggshells all the time. And then you might fall into those, I'm not really telling the truth to this person because I want to keep them as a friend or a family member or whatever. So I've got to lie to them in order to, pacify them.
Yeah.
And so again, that just kind of snowballs into, then you become more comfortable with the overall narrative of the world.
Right. Everything kind of, it all leaks into other things.
Right.
So the fact that we are not a truthful people makes truth really hard to deal with. And, it's not, my wife, Shelley, you deal with Shelley through band and everything else. You deal with Shelley. But
I know. No,
but Shelley will often be, told by people, she's scary or harsh or whatever else, which I have some issue with on a reality basis. But the thing of it is, she's just telling the truth. You just say what is true.
She's told me before, she said something like, I'm going to misquote her, so I apologize, Shelley, but people say they want you to be truthful with them, but then you're truthful with them and they get offended.
Right.
So.
And that's kind of where we are, is we've developed a society that expects lies. Like, and all kidding aside about does this dress make me look fat? When Shelley and I were first married, before we were married, we made an agreement that if you ask me that question, I will assume that you actually want an answer. So if you don't actually want an answer, don't ask the question, which works out well because she doesn't tend to ask questions she doesn't want the answer to. Right. I mean, that's part of Shelley. I mean, honestly, from the time we met, I learned much more about my own, I don't have a better way of saying it, that my own basic dishonesty. When I thought I was an honest person, I think I shared this Sunday, I I think we all think we're honest people, right? Because if we didn't, who wants to be a dishonest person?
Right.
So we either believe we are honest or we rationalize our dishonesty and justify it that little white lies aren't really,
Right.
whatever. And so I thought I was an honest person until I met a truly honest person. And so even, back in, 1988 as 18-year-olds, Shelley would say the thing that other people are thinking but don't want to say because somebody's going to, be freaked out by it. You can't have an honest confrontation. But Shelley's a gunfighter, right? Again, Westerns. And so there's no back shooting going on. There's an honest confrontation. I'm going to tell you to your face, this is how I feel. It's why, when we first met, I could have married her a week after meeting her. I didn't. It took a little while, year and a half. But anyway, as we, developed our relationship, one of the things that made that relationship rapidly plausible, let me put it that way, it was the fact that there are no cards hidden up the sleeve. If you know what's going on. There's no duplicitousness, and you may not like what's being said, but you don't have to question whether it's true, whether it's real. And so when she says, what do you think of this outfit? She wants me to tell her, because if I lie to her to make her feel good, and she goes out into public and then later on feels like, oh my gosh, I look like a clown because my husband, didn't tell me the truth. Well, that's not loving. That's not helpful to her. Right. So, we decided early on. I mean, we're only 18 at the time. We're 19. We got married at 19. So it's somewhere in that 18, 19 area. Like, we're not going to play that game. We're just going to shoot straight. Mm-hmm. And while it sounds like a small thing, we joke about that all the time in society. That particular question is a trap, right? But goodness, speaking of social media, there are so many reels and different things they're making all the jokes about the interaction between men and women and what you can't be honest about and so on and so forth. But we've created that scenario by building an expectation of helpful lies. Mm-hmm. And I would contend that in the end, for the most part, they're not helpful.
Well, you kind of just touched on that as well. We think that we're telling lies to be helpful and compassionate even at times, but at the end of the day, if your wife is wearing an outfit and you say, yeah, you look great, and they go out into the world and everyone else is like, yee. And so that's actually more harmful than helpful. And the same goes with
you felt good for the moment,
right?
But it really, in the end, you feel worse.
So we can look at bigger situations with that as well. If somebody, like we were just talking about a minute ago, if somebody says, well, this is my truth, this is my identity, this is my whatever, if you're just like, okay, yeah, it is. Right. You might think that you're being kind and compassionate and whatever, but you ain't.
So what do I do when my child decides, Mom, Dad, I've been keeping the secret, I'm gay. Right. Or Mom, Dad, I feel like I'm not really this gender. I'm actually the opposite gender or some other thing.
I mean, that's a very real situation that parents face.
More and more real because we've created, again, even as I say these things, I'm aware that some folks are going to be offended when I say the true thing.
Well, and
the true thing is we've created a social contagion where it becomes the cool thing. It becomes the accepted cultural mechanism for coping, right? So now whatever my struggle is, it manifests itself in this thing that we've created as normal. And
if you don't accept it for what it is, you're harmful.
You're the problem.
Right.
And the trope that gets put out there of, would you rather have if your daughter thinks she's a boy, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Right. That kind of a thing. What does
that tell you right there? That it's a mental illness issue.
It is, right.
That needs to be worked
absolutely.
out.
And it's a false dichotomy as well. That as we create these situations, we use arguments that sound really,
Is it raining? Sounds very hard in the headphones.
Yeah, it might be. It was raining earlier. I'm not really sure. We also didn't turn off the air conditioner, so
it's like a torrential downpour in the headphones. So I'm sorry if you hear that.
We got all the good times.
We're having weather.
Welcome to something behind the scenes.
Something meteorological. Meteorological.
So as we're looking at these things that we are in our society told, I mean, we're coached that you have to, if you love your child, you have to support them in this, but it's harmful to them.
Right.
So if I tell my child whatever, let's take those hot button issues out, and we'll make it a fill in the blank. So you take that same statement, Mom, Dad, I'm in love with a 6-year-old. Oh, do we think we should support that? Is that good? Mom, Dad, I am a heroin addict. You know what? I think that's really good. I want to support you in this because I love you. It's not the choice that I would make, but because I love you, I want to support you. I don't want you to feel abandoned in this. Nobody does that.
And if that makes you happy.
Right. Yeah. So let me make sure you have a clean needle so you can shoot up with this. And we've been doing this for so long. From go back in the 80s when we started seeing public schools promoting passing out birth control and things like that, so that sex education became normal in the schools rather than in the families and the churches. And it had been happening, it had been a push, and then it became mainstreamed, and then in the 90s it kind of blew up. And by the time you were in high school, it was just accepted. It was just normal, right?
Well, it's funny you said that, 'cause I remember very vividly commercials in the late 90s. And it was for sex education, and it was encouraging parents to talk to their kids about it, and it would have different people on the TV because if you don't, then I will. And
the skeezy old guy,
yeah, or the like things. The player kind of guy that would talk, yeah. And so even back then, they, I guess, were wanting parents to get more involved and tell the truth.
Yeah, and the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the early to mid 80s became a talking point for that. So immediately there was a connection, and with, I don't want to get too political and start naming names of government officials who completely changed their story because of political pressure.
Politician did that?
Yeah, it is shocking, isn't it? Pardon me. Goodness gracious. Apparently the coffee didn't help me. And so-called scientists who are so-called doctors, and I use the term so-called very pejoratively, but basically changing their conclusions based on lobbyists. So I remember a Designing Women, if you remember the sitcom Designing Women.
Do not cross a sugar baker woman.
I knew you would. I don't know if our listeners, but since we've got some guys that are listening. Anyway, I used to watch that all the time. Shelley loved it. Actually, the woman that created that was from a town about half an hour from where Shelley grew up in Missouri. So anyway, not relevant.
Trivia night.
But there was a big episode that you might remember where this nice young man who was gay develops AIDS. And so the whole crux of the thing was the school board being against giving out birth control and condoms in particular. And so the whole moral point, the whole moral stance is that the schools need to make these things available, and parents need to recognize your kids are going to be sexually active. And so you need to provide means for them to have safe sex. Incidentally, none of that has worked. We've made everything okay and provided all the protection that you can possibly imagine, and it has not gotten better. The things have not gotten better. As we were talking about in Something to Rant About before we got on the cast here, you can see the commercials. The only option that is not available in these commercials, if you have HIV, whatever diseases, all these different things, take this medication and you can take care of the situation. The only thing that they will never, ever, ever suggest is stop your harmful behavior. These risky behaviors need to stop. And if you just stop doing the things that lead to this, which is an option, but oh no, because we are nothing more than brute beasts. We must act on our urges all the time. Let's medicate the situation. And I'm not, don't hear me saying I'm against science or against medication. When there's an illness, you treat the illness, but let's stop using the treatments as an excuse to do more foolishness.
Right. Well, we've got to wrap things up here. I am glad that we kind of dove into this side of things today, because I know in the sermon you kind of focused, I thought, on a lot of the legalities of it, and that's
Mm.
important. And I think that's what most people think of when they think of this commandment. And that, if going through some
Yeah.
legal stuff myself, that definitely resonated with me. So, but I was glad we got to touch on this side of it as well today. So,
Well, I would like to close with, just because you mentioned the legality and we do, whether we're talking about stealing or we're talking about lying, we get caught up in these technicalities. So
Mhm.
I didn't technically lie because
Right.
I just left out certain things. So we lie by omission. All these
they're
different
more like
ways of doing it.
guidelines.
Right. But Jesus in Matthew 5 and his half brother James later on in his epistle, both present the idea of just being an honest person.
Mm.
And so sometimes we'll get bogged down in the details of this and say, oh, well, I can't swear an oath at all. Well, that would be contrary to the rest of the Bible. So if we take a wooden literalism and look at what Jesus is saying, that I can't, if I'm on jury duty, I can't, swear an oath in the courtroom. If I am a witness or whatever else, I can't swear to tell the truth. Here's what Jesus says. Again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. So this is just talking about, as a witness, this is the vows that you make to God.
Mm-hmm.
This is a religious vow, a religious oath. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. So there's a combination here of what he's saying, right? So when I swear, as so often you hear, it always makes me cringe since I was a kid, when you hear people say, oh, I swear to God. Mm-hmm. When they generally don't actually mean that. Usually if you're saying that, you're probably lying, and that's why you have to use this oath to show how serious you are.
Right.
So, don't break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. So speaking of religious vows, any other way that you might use the name of the Lord in an oath. But I tell you, verse 34, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Mm-hmm. The point that Jesus is making, and you can see this in the context of all of the Sermon on the Mount here, is you're just not going far enough. Right. You're looking at keeping the details, but you're missing the point. Be an honest person. If you say something, everybody should know. It should just be a basic expectation that it is true, so that there's no need for you to swear an oath. Right. Now, that doesn't change the formats of legal situations, right, and so on and so forth. But if I say to you yes, I should mean yes. And if I say to you no, I should mean no. And there should be no hiding of the hand, no dealing under the table, any of this kind of stuff. Right. It should just be upfront. No, to go back to the Westerns, no shooting in the back, no ambushes, just truth. And we're not good at that in our society.
No, we're not. So again, we'll wrap up there. We have one commandment to go in this little mini series within Deuteronomy. So,
it is much bigger than what I expected.
That's just been it for me this entire series. Yeah. So yeah, it's never too late to join us, either in person or online. So feel free to come on by if you're in the Southwest Michigan area, or you can check out our live stream on Sunday mornings. And then we will talk about it here at the podcast, usually on Thursdays afterward. So we will catch you guys later.
Hopefully YouTube got all the way through today.
So. Catch you later. Did you get through YouTube? Looks like it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. I can clean